What are you going to do when Google wants a different feed than iTunes? It's the Podcast Report, episode 121, show notes, links, conversation, and more at thepodcastreport.com/121. This episode brought to you by How to Podcast Training at howtopodcasttraining.com. Who else wants to learn how to podcast the podcast partnership way? More details again at howtopodcasttraining.com. This episode is a solid interview with Rob Walch from Libsyn. Now, those of you who have followed me over the years, you know that there have been other hosts, there have been other players, there have been other options, but Libsyn has been in an interesting place. Their steadfastness, their longevity, their willingness to be in this since day one is fascinating, and I appreciate that. And the model they've had for you don't pay for the bandwidth, you pay for the hosting so you know how to budget, I've also appreciated that. But more importantly, and something that I really want to focus on this episode and in this interview with Rob, is that Libsyn has a plan. Libsyn has a strategy. Libsyn has an understanding of podcasting that is bigger than podcasting is right now. So yes, they're the oldest one in the game. Yes, they've been around forever. Yes, they don't have any of that new fancy, flashy, shiny stuff that some of the others have. But as you'll see in this interview, they have a take and a view on podcast hosting that I just simply can't find anywhere else. Now, is this a commercial for Libsyn? No. This is an interview with Rob, and this is an examination of ideas such as destinations. This is an examination of ideas such as forking the feeds. This is an idea to what happens when somebody actually legitimately goes against iTunes for podcast directory and podcast hosting. Yes, we've had some people dip their toe in the water, and who knows if iTunes will ever give any market share to anyone else, but Google's trying and Stitcher's doing things, and who knows, one day Microsoft might pull something off. Amazon, what are they going to do? We don't know. You got to have a strategy for that. And what's neat about Libsyn is inside of what they've done, they have a strategy for that. Their concept of destinations makes it possible for you to publish different things at different places with the same podcasting. And I just thought it would be something really important to point out to you, the podcaster. So I go along with Rob, not as long as the last couple of interviews, but it's a good 45 minutes. It's a good, solid, complete look at what you're going to want from a hosting platform. It's a good, solid, complete look at what you want to think of when you're thinking of long term with your podcast. If you're going to do real business with your podcast, this requires that you have the tools and the ability to do real business. And this is more than the ability to redirect a feed if things go south, although that's important. This is an understanding of the industry, where it's going, how to plan for it, how to respond to it. And I think that's what they've done over there. So we're going to go with Rob. Let me give you a couple of things. If you want to comment on this episode, thepodcastreport.com/121. If you want to do the social thing, thepodcastreport.com/Twitter, thepodcastreport.com/Facebook. If you haven't subscribed to the show, please do so. It's subscription that makes podcasting so powerful. Thepodcastreport.com/iTunes, thepodcastreport.com/Stitcher, thepodcastreport.com/Google. Love to have the interaction with you. Love to have you as a subscriber. But more importantly, I would love to, and I'm going to introduce you to a company, a thought process, an approach to podcasting that is about the real business of podcasting that I think is a little bigger than some of the things you've heard before. So without further ado, let's get to Rob. It is Rob Walch from Libsyn. How you doing, Rob?
I am doing excellent, Paul. Thank you for having me on the show.
Rob, how long have you been with Libsyn?
It'll be 10 years in August.
Exactly. That's the first point. Libsyn's been around for a long time. I remember the first time I heard of Libsyn, and it was funny because Libsyn came with this concept to podcasting at the very, very beginning that if your podcast got huge, and back then everybody had dreams of getting huge. They still have dreams, but back then we were a bit more ignorant at least. The idea was that if you got huge, you wouldn't be discounted for it. You wouldn't be charged for it. You wouldn't be surprised by it. Your bill at Libsyn was going to be exactly the same, regardless of the traffic and the bandwidth you did. Now, in the beginning, that caused some issues and some times, and there were people certainly taking advantage of that, but Libsyn survived, and Rob nearly a decade, but they've been going longer than that. I remember when Rob joined Libsyn.
Yeah, I mean, I joined Libsyn almost 10 years ago, and I was podcasting with Libsyn for 2.5 years at that point that I joined.
Bingo.
So, right. So Libsyn's been around over 12 years now. They were the first podcast host before there was an ODO, before there was an iTunes, before there was any of the other stuff. There was any other companies in podcasting. There was Libsyn. Before there was an article in USA Today about podcasting. It was 2004. There was a Libsyn.
There we go. So I was at Gnomedex, which is a big nerd show. And I can't remember which year it was.
Where I met you.
Yeah,
it was
exactly.
2005.
It was
right?
Okay, that's what I thought. It was 2005. It was Gnomedex. It was right before 4th of July weekend. Adam Curry. Now, I'd gotten Todd Cochran's book, which was absolutely hilarious because Todd's book never mentioned iTunes. Now, my first book never mentioned the iPhone. So, we all have these things. And it wasn't that Todd didn't write a chapter about iTunes. It was just that at that point, it wasn't the option. That wasn't how we got our podcasts. So Todd's handing out his book. Adam Curry is doing his 200th episode or something like that. And there's this company called FeedBurner, which is for all sakes and purposes dead. But FeedBurner handled feeds. And right before we all went home, Apple made an announcement. Apple needed some new things. Apple had some requirements for their RSS feed. And the beautiful thing was, because FeedBurner was handling my feed, I can't remember the guy's name, maybe you do, VP of FeedBurner was sitting
Rick Clow.
Rick, yes, Rick. Rick's sitting next to me. And I look at Rick and I go, you got a busy weekend, don't you, Rick? And Rick looks at me and goes, yep, I got to call everybody into the office. And he did. They had to handle the feed. And I looked around in the room at all these podcasters that were coding their own feed or using these third-party feed programmers or that type of thing. And I just said, oh my goodness. Somebody else handling my feed is the greatest thing in the world. So Rick goes home and has a lousy 4th of July weekend. I go home and I have a fantastic 4th of July weekend. Enter Libsyn. As Libsyn continues to grow, continues to get big, one of the great things is Libsyn handles the feed. It's part of what they do. And I've always been the proponent of, you got to let the computers do the things that the computers do. Nobody writes in PostScript for their printer. They write in Microsoft Word or Notepad or something like that. They let the computer handle it. Coding your own feed is absolutely ridiculous. And so Libsyn handles the feed, and there were others who handled the feed. Things got interesting. I do the first copy of How to Podcast, and the book goes well, and at that point, I wasn't maybe as tired and as bitter as I am today, I guess. But what had happened was I had put all the hosts in the first version of the book. I was trying to be a good netizen, trying to give all the options, trying to be the good journalist. But what happened was I would get email after email. I'd get call after call. I'd get Facebook post after Facebook post. Why did you recommend X? It's a mess. Why did you do this? This is a mess. Why did you do this? This is a mess. And it was really interesting because they had something very not in common with each other. None of them were about Libsyn. They were about all the other hosts. Nobody complained about Libsyn. Now, there were a couple who said things like, is there a cheaper option on Libsyn than the $5 account? And those types of things, whatever. But nobody complained about Libsyn. And then Rob and I had a conversation that really rocked my world. And it was something that really helped me understand what the difference is between Libsyn and everybody else. Now, Rob is, and this isn't going to be about this on this episode, Rob is one of the biggest proponents in the world of, if you call it anything other than a podcast, you're a moron. And Rob will die with a tombstone that says podcast, not netcasts. I mean, he is a massive proponent of this industry. He's an evangelist, Hall of Famer, whole 9 yards. Thank you for your service, my friend. But, go ahead.
I don't think I would waste the space with the word netcast. I'll just say it's a podcast, stupid.
There we go. Now, but things started to happen. The app industry started to happen. The websites started to happen. Social started to happen. And Libsyn came up with this realization that we could send our podcasts to multiple destinations. We could send them to Twitter. We could send them to Facebook. We could send them to iTunes. We might send them somewhere else. We could send them to an app. And there was this option inside of Libsyn, and nobody else was doing this, at least that I know of, where you could go in and go, okay, this goes to the feed, but this doesn't. Maybe my app will enable a special download of a PDF that you get only for the app. And that could be either a reason to get people to download the app. That could be a reason to get people to pay for the app. I mean, when you first launched your app, just by doing bonuses, you had some crazy conversion. What was it?
Well, my conversion rate was well over 20%. Early on. And I've seen some people, Mark Maron at one point in time, his audience for his app was 50% of his downloads.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. So you came up with this idea of destinations. And that was fun in the app versus podcast world. But then things started to pop up. Google comes up and says, hey, we're going to play the podcast game. Now, we've done other episodes on Google's podcast game, and whether it's even worth an episode is another conversation. But Google is Google. They're tremendous. And at one point, they might go, hey, we want things different than you do at iTunes. Spotify's in the game.
Right.
Spreaker's in the game. iHeartRadio's in the game. Who else is in the game?
Well, soon to be Alexa, Amazon. So you're going to have that in the game. TuneIn, as you mentioned. You've got YouTube as a destination. So I look at we have a lot of different destinations, and Tumblr and Blogger and Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. These are all different destinations that we have available. So there's a lot of different places you can push content out. But Spotify, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Stitcher, iTunes. iTunes obviously is the big dog, bigger than everybody else combined. There are a lot of different places that you can send content out to these days.
And that becomes interesting because you can have strategies for this multiple distribution place. If you only have one feed, then either everybody gets it or nobody gets it. If you have multiple feeds, you can do different things. You can do, hey, the show notes in PDF on the app. You just have to either download my app for free and help me in the charts, or maybe pay for the app and help with the monetization of the podcast. You can do, was it the Nerdist that was doing things early, or what?
Yeah, the Nerdist, when Spotify launched, Libsyn was the only podcast hosting partner at the launch, but there was some other podcast networks that were part of that, and Nerdist was one of them. And what they did with Spotify is they made an agreement. They would release content early to Spotify, a few hours early to Spotify before they released it anywhere else. And that got them prime promotion from Spotify at the launch event and in Spotify app itself. So that's one of the things you can do. And that's one of the things I tell people. One of the advantages of having multiple destinations is you can do special content for different destinations and work out an arrangement to get promoted. The other thing is you can have different artwork. It's great that your show was a top 100 podcast in iTunes. You don't want to flash that on your artwork that's in Spotify. And someone did that. Someone was uploaded their artwork that had the banner that said iTunes 2015 pick. And the guys at Spotify are like, can you get them to change that artwork? I'm like, oh, yeah. So I said, why'd you upload this artwork? Upload your other artwork. So they uploaded their old artwork in there, and without mentioning iTunes, and Spotify was happy. So that's one of the key reasons. And then you mentioned the other reason to have multiple destinations. And the one I always tell people between iTunes and Google is, why would you put the same feed in Google that you put in iTunes? Eventually, Google and iTunes are going to disagree. And then you have to pick which parent is getting a divorce. When they get a divorce, which parent you got to go with. And so eventually you're going to need two feeds for Google anyway. It's just a matter of if, not when.
Well, and it becomes fascinating because, before you and I started this recording, we talked about, everybody who loves WordPress, but the deeper they get in, the more programmers they have on staff. Now, someone can certainly have the ability to give Google something different and give Spotify something different and give, iHeartRadio something different. But then it requires, a feed nerd on staff and maybe different feed nerds with different capabilities and understandings and relationships with some of the other places. You guys have been the first to launch for a lot of these, and it's been because you've handled it. And I've had this pleasure to just, oh, look, new destination, click, yes, I'll have that destination. And then you ask for 3 or 4 pieces of information that destination wants. Certainly fair to me. I prefer to speak for myself, not you. I fill out the form and bam, I've got myself a destination. This is huge. This is bigger than this idea that I make a feed and I spray that feed at the world. Are you seeing this used? Are you seeing this embraced? What are you seeing at Libsyn?
First, let me say this. The RSS feed is the most important thing. I mean, that is where the majority of your downloads are going to come from, your RSS feed. But that doesn't mean you have to have the same RSS feed for everybody. You can have a destination where we have customized feeds. We've got the one that's for iTunes. We've got one for Google Play Music, one for iHeartRadio, one for Spotify. We publish out to SoundCloud. There's a bunch of different places we push out to. Some of them are actually pushing the content. So like SoundCloud and YouTube and Facebook, the content's getting pushed out there. Others are pulling from the feed, like Spotify and iHeartRadio. And iHeartRadio doesn't even rehost it. So they actually just pulling from the feed and just populating their directory like iTunes does and now Stitcher does. And then you have Google Play Music and Stitch and Spotify that actually pull one copy and then re-encode and redistribute. But the point is they all have different requirements. If you look at our iHeartRadio destination and you go in there to that destination, go to set it up, there is personal information about you, the host, about each. You can have up to 10 different hosts, all their Facebook and Instagram and other links for each of the hosts, plus images for the host, plus show information and show Instagram and Facebook, all the stuff that you wouldn't want to throw that in your regular RSS feed. But iHeart is asking for it so that they can populate iHeart to look how iHeart wants iHeart to look. Just like iTunes had special tags, iHeart has special requirements. Spotify has special requirements. So we try to customize and make it easy. And where possible, like with iHeart and if you get chosen for Spotify, you don't even have to go to them to submit. You just go into Libsyn and you fill in the information, you click accept the terms and service, and your show gets sent in and submitted to them. Now, Spotify is still curating, so it's still where they have to first accept you before we can turn on your destination. But iHeart, if you've been with Libsyn for 2 months, the iHeart destination is already available for you. You just go in, fill it out, click accept terms, and boom, within 2 weeks, your show's in iHeart. You don't have to go anywhere else and submit it. So it makes it easy. The Alexa one, when we announced that fully, there's a little bit of stuff that has to be done there on Alexa that if you weren't going through us, you'd have to figure out how to write a skill. You still have to get your own Amazon account. They want you to get an account, but we're going to help you on that. And then we're going to write the skill for you, and then automatically publish it into your Alexa account. So we're going to make it what would otherwise be a really, really complicated process. And trust me, we got the first 5 set up. If you have an Alexa Echo right now, just say, Alexa, enable the Tim Ferriss Show, or Alexa, enable Hardcore History. And you can see examples of the skill. And that's a first gen skill. We'll have additional features, but it was fun getting those written. And I tell you, most podcasters that couldn't tell you the difference between RSS and CSS, they don't want to deal with a skill. They don't want to deal with WordPress. Most podcasters, I think one of the most annoying myths out there is that you need a WordPress site to podcast. I hate that. Most people don't want to deal with that and pay $250 an hour to have someone manage their WordPress site. And the one thing you never hear anyone talk about, less than 5% of your audience comes from your website anyway. And the bigger the show, the lower that percentage is.
So there are 2 types listening to this point in the podcast. Some are going, yeah, this is Libsyn. I get this, Rob. Nothing new here. Mm-hmm. And for those of you, we'll talk to some insight later. There are others who are going, Paul, I don't get the big deal. And this is important because I want to take you to the big deal. The majority of the hosting platforms, alternatives out there, if they provide feeds, they provide one. And yes, Google will take that one feed right now. And yes, Google slurps it in and makes it work, but that could change. I don't know the particulars of the other sites, but I know Stitcher will take the feed. I know TuneIn will take the feed. So the majority of them, the quote unquote big guys right now are there, and you can sort of hack and slash your way into this. But a specific strategy to distribute all these things automatically and the means by which to do it and to track is really, really interesting. This show, the first place it's released is by Twitter, and it's done with a destination inside of Libsyn. And I will get, 4 or 5 dozen downloads of that thing from my Twitter audience before I even have placed the blog posting that has the show notes on a very annoying WordPress blog, like Rob said, but that's different. And so I have this tool set with Libsyn that simply isn't available anywhere else. And it's a tool set I can use to minor advantages now. I mean, one dumb stat, everybody knows I do a lot of stuff with YouTube. I auto-publish my audio podcast to YouTube directly through Libsyn. And one of the funny things, Rob talked about album art. I give them a special album art that looks good on iTunes, because nothing looks sillier on iTunes than a square piece of album art. And go ahead.
I was and I used to manually for YouTube. I used to manually convert my audio to video. And at 3 a.m, now I'm at 3:45 in the morning by the time I'm all done.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you're getting 5 hours of sleep or 4 hours of sleep a night, getting an extra 45 minutes percentage-wise is a pretty good deal.
Exactly. And what's great is I now go into the stats. Now, are masses of people flocking to YouTube to consume my podcast? No. But when it was a button I set up once, back when Rob and I had this conversation, it's a bunch of fun listens. And here's the funny thing. I go in and I look at the stats, and YouTube stats will tell you how long people consume the video. And even though, yes, it's only audio with the picture, it's still technically a video. And what's funny is a 30-minute episode of the podcast report will be consumed longer at YouTube than similar 30-minute videos. So I've got another distribution plan. I don't know. Maybe it's the YouTube Red guys. I don't know where it is. What do you think, Rob?
YouTube Red is one of the things whenever I see people talking about, people don't listen to podcasts, they don't want to listen in YouTube. YouTube Red is the one thing people don't seem to understand what it is and the importance of YouTube Red, and that is it allows you to play audio in the background. And YouTube, people don't realize, is the second platform for audio listening. It's the second largest platform for audio listening in the world. More and more people listen to music on YouTube than almost any other platform out there. So people are used to consuming the audio side of things. And I'll put it this way. Would you spend 5 minutes one time to potentially pick up 10 listeners every episode going forward?
There we go.
All right. Would you spend 45 minutes every episode to maybe pick up 5 listeners? And probably not. But if you only had to spend 5 minutes one time setting it up and possibly pick up at least 5 to 10 every episode, you'd do it. I mean, no matter what size the audience, because you never know who the 5 or 10 are. And I had one of my episodes go viral on YouTube when I interviewed Aaron Menke for Podcast 411. I had thousands of listens on YouTube, which I never would have expected. Now, because people were searching for Aaron Menke, and they were coming across my interview with him from Podcast 411, and they were coming across it on YouTube. That's where they were searching. That's where they were. And I think the best way to put our philosophy with destinations is we want to help everyone, not just the big shows, but everyone, big and small, be everywhere, except Pandora, because Pandora doesn't get it. But everywhere but Pandora. If you listen to audio somewhere, it's whoever that person is, your podcast should be available to them. And that is what our philosophy is, has been, and will continue to be. We want it for everybody. And then if you leave Libsyn, we have the tools in place so that you can redirect. Nobody has ever been locked in or lost their audience or lost control of their show that hosted with Libsyn, not in 12 plus years. There's FUD out there. Some people try to say that you got to control your feed. Controlling your feed is having it in a place that if you do leave, has the tools in place for you to put the redirects or them to put in a permanent redirect. And Libsyn has that. Libsyn, again, we're not about locking anyone in ever. We're not Podomatic.
Well, no. Now, and to be fair here, there are a number listening who are now saying, "Oh, Paul, this is why you asked me to move over to Libsyn." And I want to be clear that your departure strategy or capacity, I guess is the better term, is not a checkbox somewhere on the website that means people will go first to the original place and then out to you. It's working with in the confines of RSS to truly move things alongside, so that eventually Libsyn just isn't part of the story anymore if somebody decides to leave, and then of course if somebody decides to come back. So it's not a trick, it's not a hack, it's a feature that a number of the other platforms have not provided for pick whatever reason you want, but have not provided. Is that pretty accurate?
There's 4 levels, 4 things that you can do with regards to the feed and redirect and moving audience. And we have all 4. First one is we have the ability for the producer to go in at any time and add a redirect, 302 redirect. They can just go in and put the new URL at any point and redirect. We have the ability at any point for producer to go in and add the iTunes new feed tag. That's the second item. We have the ability beyond that, before those, you can bring in a custom URL. So when you sign up for an account, you don't have to be tii.libsyn.com. It can be acstartup411.com/RSS. So you can bring in your own custom URL from day one. And then finally, if you do decide to leave, you can ask us to put in a permanent one-time redirect for your account. And we'll just basically, we mothball your account, we put a permanent redirect in for a one-time $25 fee. And that's it. And forever, for as long as the life of your show, that redirect will be in there. So we give all 4 of those options. And I think between all of them combined, you don't have to ever worry about losing your audience.
So $2 more a month on the standard account, I can have the feed be myname.com/RSS. And then, I could leave tomorrow and not even tell you, but because I control the domain name, I'm good to go. Correct. All the way through to the insert of the tag, to the $25, what's the redirect number?
$25 one time. You just hit up support and say, okay, right, I'm leaving you guys, and please put in a permanent redirect to this new URL.
And that's really for people who have like a feed listed like in a book of feeds somewhere, that type of thing. Because an existing audience, you do the feed redirect or you do the tag, they'll come with. This is for really archaic stuff, right?
Right. And it's just one time, and that's it. Yep. Yeah. And again, we hope you stay with us, but we're not going to force you to stay with us. You stay. We want it to be a relationship you want to be in, not that you're forced to be in.
So, feed management, Libsyn does it. Libsyn has the headaches that our buddy Rick had. The opportunities and the options out there. Nothing right now screaming that you have to have 2 different feeds, but the opportunity of putting special things at a special time or at a special date, or sending a PDF to the app or that type of thing. Fascinating right now, but projecting ahead to what's coming in the future. Destination's really huge. Another thing played at, and I can't remember if they were at Gnome Decks, I know some of the players were, but podcast ad insertion, stitching of new content. We had our friends, or do they still exist as a legal entity?
Kiptronic?
That was the one I was thinking of. I was thinking the one that GoHagen was involved with.
Oh, yeah, they were second, but yeah, they were going to do some. I forgot what the name of theirs was, but yeah, people. One of the things that is funny. You want to see bad writing, and people that don't do research is just find any article that talks about ad insertion being something new.
Right.
You'll see they'll talk about Art19 and their ad insertion, and it's some new technology. And no, I mean, Kiptronic did it 12 years ago. Libsyn's been doing it for 10 years. There's nothing new about ad insertion. I agree to some degrees with what Dan mentioned about the downside of ad insertion.
And you're speaking to Dan Benjamin last week's interview, or interview 118. I can't remember what order this one's going in, but the Dan Benjamin interview.
Right. And he mentioned, that, for advertising, ad insertion isn't always the best. And I would agree in many cases that's true, especially if it's programmatic and you don't have any say in what's going in. I can tell you this, advertisers that have come along and bought ad inserted campaigns, 10% return. Advertisers that come along and buy campaigns where it's host read, 90% return. That's because the host read ads are so much better. But there are places where ad insertion makes sense, and it's not just about advertising; it's more about promotion insertion.
Yes, yes.
Dave Ramsey.
Well, let's chat really quick for those. There are the nerds in the audience who are going, yeah. Those are those who don't know what this means. So I can speak to it really quickly. We can dynamically update an MP3 to put more content into the MP3. You can do it at the beginning. You could do it at the end. You could even do it if you have a specific time slot in there where you want to do that. So you could take content that is 5 years old, give it a new commercial. You could take content, what you said about the promotions, absolutely huge. You could take a podcast that still has, for some reason, listing in different directories and people still go to it and let people know, hey, although this podcast is 5 years old, you can head on over here. Anyway, you're about to say Dave Ramsey. Let's talk about Dave. What's Dave?
Dave Ramsey, Joyce Meyer. What they've done with the ad insertion is they have live events in different places around the country. And what they'll do is they will put a special pre-roll or post-roll ad for Chicago saying, hey, events coming up in Chicago. Or they'll put it for the DMA in Kansas City saying, hey, there's going to be an Entree Leadership Day in Leawood. Come to this event. And they'll only put it in the areas where the event's going to be. So they're not annoying all their audience. And they're saying, they're getting more focused. Hey, Kansas Cityans, come see us. We're going to be live in your event. When you hear that, hey, Kansas Cityans, you are more likely to listen to the fact that they just customized it to you than saying, hey, we're going to be we're going to have events in the next 6 weeks. We're going to have events in Kansas City, Denver, Chicago, and Atlanta. And you might just tune out as soon as they start hearing that. And you might miss your city. But when they say Kansas Cityans right at the beginning, boom, you hit it, you understand it, you know it's your market. And no one else hears that other than you. And I was at the Entree Leadership event when I was here in Kansas City. And I was asking everyone, I'm like, hey, how'd you hear about this event? Because I was just curious. Everyone to a T said they heard about it through the podcast. Everybody I asked at the event. Not one person said, I heard it on Dave's radio show, which is nationally syndicated and broadcast locally. All of them said they heard about it on the podcast. So you have a local event. Ad insertion is great for the geo-target part of it. And it doesn't have to be about just people think it's advertising.
No.
That's the worst part of ad insertion.
Yeah, agreed. And you do this as a company, and you do this under the Libsyn Pro line,
correct?
Which is not the unlimited bandwidth. There's just some plain as you dynamically create MP3s on the fly. There's just some power associated with that, and you've got to charge for it and bandwidth. And I want to chat to a bit of a hack on the bandwidth side of things because people miss this. You charge a certain amount per month, and Rob, how do people get a hold of you if they wanted to do Libsyn Pro?
Very simple. Email me, Rob, R-O-B, as in Robert, at Libsyn.com. So R-O-B at Libsyn.com, and I can give you the information. And we have two services. We have Libsyn.com, which is more for the indie podcasters, nonprofits, churches, that kind of thing. And then we have Libsyn Pro, which is meant for the more serious media companies. That's where the HBOs of the world host their podcasts and Consumer Reports. Even Amazon host their podcast with us rather than on Amazon S3. So I always love people like, why should we use you over S3? Well, even Amazon doesn't eat their own dog food. They host with us.
The cobbler's shoes, yes. That service, and I appreciate what you said. Yeah, ads are not the opportunity. It's the it's the updates. It's the timely stuff. Imagine if you were listening to a podcast from 4 years ago and it started with, hey, before you go into this Valentine's Day, that type of thing is interesting stuff. I'm moving a client over that right now, and the plans we have are fantastic, and I know the reach is going to be beautiful. And what's wonderful is the CEO, the COO, the guy who runs the numbers on this. He called me with the classic, well, what is this going to cost me thing? Right now we're only paying X, the price is going to go up, Paul, and it's going to be based on bandwidth. Well, the beautiful thing was the COO who actually runs numbers. Once we got it down to a per stream cost, per download cost, he just laughed because this is a guy who's used to paying for stamps. This is a guy who's used to paying for feeding people coffee at an event. When it gets to a per download piece, it gets funny, which speaks to the production of your MP3 file. Because you charge for the service and then you also charge for the bandwidth because of the servers it has to go through. So the smaller the file that you make in a dynamically inserted product, the less it's going to cost you. Could you speak to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the mistakes I think people make is they think that if your file is encoded at some high bit rate, that's going to somehow improve your show. It's spoken word audio that people are listening through earbuds. No one's going to tell the difference of a spoken word audio file that's encoded at 64 or 96 kilobits per second versus one that's at 320 kilobits per second. So if you look at the big shows, you'll see the big shows, for many reasons, are encoding the files down at 64 and 96. 96 is the highest. If you're an audiophile, you're really anal about your audio quality, 96. Anything above 96, you are kidding yourself and thinking there's any advantage to it. You're just costing your end user money for their bandwidth, for their data plan, because everybody's listening on mobile devices. And you're hurting yourself if you're on Libsyn Pro because of the bandwidth costs. So yeah, just get your files down. And then the ad insertion part of it, we have a little fee that we charge for the ad insertion. It's not much on the Libsyn Pro side, and that's more just to keep everybody from doing it all the time. But whether you're doing it for promos or you're doing it for advertising, it's a minimal fee.
It works.
Right.
Where are you on the so now? Some of you, the nerds, are going, 96K interesting, 64K interesting. Some of you are saying, I don't know what this means. For those of you who doesn't know what it means, here's the deal. If your guy does it right, if your gal does it right, it's going to cost you less when you step it into this future. So Rob says 64 96. Where are you on the mono or stereo question? Might as well get that out there.
Mono. I'm a believer in mono. There's no reason to be stereo. You could do joint stereo, but even there's some issues with some players. I found if you go 64 kilobits per second, mono, 44.1 kilohertz sample rate, that works fine for MP3. And don't do 48. I can always tell when someone comes in from the video world or old time professional audio guy and they do 48 kilohertz for the sample rate. That causes the chipmunking on a lot of players out there, and some of the Android devices definitely didn't like it. So go with 44.1 kilohertz mono, 64 for spoken word. If you want to go 96, go. If you're really anal, go 96, but really 64. And the nice thing is 64, it's easy to remember. It's half a meg a minute. It's that simple.
There we go. That makes sense. So who else is doing this?
The ad insertion?
Yeah.
Oh, there's like I said, there's a bunch of new people that have come along that are doing the ad insertion. Art19, Audio Boom, Acast, but I don't know if you have access to the tools and what you can do with those guys, and how much of the control. Some of them, they have the ad insertion, but only if they get to put their ads in your content. And you don't really, most of those cases, you don't have much say in those CPM, and this is where me and Dan would agree. Ad inserted ads that are coming in from a programmatic point of view, the CPM rate's crap and getting crappier every day. And the ads are horrible. And now you have people that are basically putting bad ads in that are getting bad return, which causes lower CPM, which causes even worse ads and causes less shows to take them that are even worse with their audience, that causes the CPMs to go further and further. So ultimately, you're going to get CPMs down in the $1 and $2 range for the ad insertion. And you're going to have people that are doing host read ads up in the $40 and $50 ranges, because the ones that can do host read will continue to do host read because that's where the money is. It's the live reads where the money is. The mid roll, what we do at Libsyn, what Podtrack does, what Blueberry does, Raw Voice. It's the host read ads that where the real money is.
Well, and let's take the real money statement that Rob just made is true. The episode I did about why I'm doing ads now is definitely part of that. But let's take the logistics of it. We've all been to a website that wants you to take it seriously. It could be a news site on whatever political leaning you happen to have. It could be a local news site. It could be whatever. When you're at a website and you're trying to take the content seriously, and there's some jiggly animated GIF with the the 4 things you can do to cut belly fat today, and you're not on a health website or you're not on anything that has anything to do with that, you just kind of laugh. Or it has the secret that Obama wants you to know about your home mortgage, or that, when the ads are ridiculous and obviously bargain basement scraping, you begin to question the website that you're on. You begin to question the source of the content that these ads surround. And I think the same is true for podcasting.
Oh, absolutely. I've heard some really, really bad, misplaced ads that have been stitched in on some shows out there, and you just cringe. And the person's, and worst part about it is you're causing your audience to die because they're reaching for their phone to try to fast forward 30 seconds to get away from that horrible ad that you had inserted in, and they're crashing their cars and they're dying. So your bad ads aren't just bad in causing CPM rates, they're killing off podcast audience.
That should be the Libsyn t-shirt at all the events this year. Friends don't let friends do crappy ad insertion. Like that. Yeah.
Yep.
So you control the feed because you believe that someone smart should do that and not the content producer. You produce multiple feeds because there's some use of it right now, but it's only going to go that way. You could do dynamic editing of the content and serving on the content, not just based on, hey, take this episode and run this ad before it, but hey, take this episode and all the Kansas Cityans run this ad before it. Mm-hmm. You've got apps, you've got connections with the larger organization, so you can come and you can go to pick company X here and say, hey, these guys are doing 150,000 downloads, these guys are doing 200,000 downloads. You might want to give a second look and a second consideration. Now, you do this with a company that has a starting podcast rate of $5 a month. How do you afford this, my friend?
Well, as Dan said, most shows don't get a lot of downloads. Our average, most of the users that host with us are in the $15 or $20 accounts. Most go to 20 or above to get the advanced stats because people want the stats. But many people that just have started, I have on a pod fade or for a while or go on hiatus, they'll drop their accounts down to $5 because they're not really caring about stats anymore. And there's others that will start out at $5 and never move up from there. That's all they want. And they sometimes they'll add $2 to go to stats for $7. But it comes down to that we have a lot of, we talk about the numbers on the feed. The median number is about 200. Half the episodes that release get more than 200 downloads, half get less than 200. So we have the whole aggregate. Yeah, we have some really big shows. We have shows like Dan Carlin, it's on Libsyn.com, and Tim Ferriss, it's on Libsyn.com, that are getting hundreds, thousands, millions of downloads per episode. And they're big, big shows. But they also work with us for advertising, and we have an ad network, and we work with the really big shows to help bring advertising to their shows. If they don't want to work with us and they want to sign an exclusive, we have Libsyn Pro. That's another reason to move to Libsyn Pro is if you are someone that's a huge show, like the Nerdist Network, and you want to sign an exclusive ad deal with Midroll, then we have Libsyn Pro for you. Because in that case, you're making a lot of money and you can work with us to share on that cost on the bandwidth. And we have a really good rate on the bandwidth. Anyway.
Are you are you profitable? Are you?
Oh, yeah. We've been profitable for years.
There we go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're profitable, making money, cash. We are we are the anti-internet company. We actually believe in making money and being fiscally responsible. And our numbers are out there. We're publicly traded. You can go and look at our 10Qs out there, and you can see our numbers, and you can see that we are a profitable company. And that's why we're here still to this day, and why we've been around. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've been so reliable. We haven't had downtime. People like hosting with us because they don't have any issues. And I think that's one of the most important things you look for at a podcast host is, we did over 25% of all the downloads that went through iTunes last year with no downtime. That, I think, right there speaks volumes. People talk about the ability, I'm going to have the ability to scale when we get bigger and da-da-da. We scaled. We're already there. We can tell you that it's not hypothetical if we can scale. We've scaled. We've done that. And we continue to grow. And we talk billions of downloads. When we do presentations, I talk billions. Other people may talk millions. We talk billions.
So I want to be careful not to make this an ad for Libsyn. This is not a continuation of the Why Paul's Taking Ads. This is not advertorial. This is an important issue in the space because I have a number of clients stuck with a certain host movement. They keep waiting for Apple to fix the change your feed thing so that it's real, or they hope that the host will grow up and one day give them the means to leave, or they just believe some bad press and find themselves maybe functional, maybe serving, maybe still building an audience, but a little bit terrified behind the scenes because, what happens if it does explode? And maybe the explosion is their bandwidth, their audience, their reputation. Maybe the explosion is the company that they're hosting with. What's interesting about Libsyn is decade plus, model plus, forward thinking, a pro division that does the ad insertion, and this whole concept of destinations, which serves podcasting here, Q1 2017, but also serves podcasting in the Qs to come. And I think this is really, really important. If you're stuck with an existing host, sometimes there are some ways to get out. There are some ways to get out creatively. I would not say necessarily go to Libsyn, but I'd say go to someone who's going to treat you like Libsyn.
I'd say if you're not going to host with Libsyn, host someplace that they have an exit strategy. You can get out. That's what I always say. Make sure wherever you go, they're not going to lock you in. They have the tools. Ask them from day one. Okay, if I decide to leave, how do I leave? People email me and ask me that question all the time, and I'll send them. I have a canned response. Here you go. Here's how you can leave. But check that with any place you host, and there are other places to host other than Libsyn, and obviously, but make sure wherever it is that you host, they're actually really a podcast hosting company. They're not just part of their business. That's their business. That's their core business. Because that way they don't put your RSS feed in maintenance for 3 days while they do some updates. As one company did last year. That's unheard of. The RSS feed is so important, and make sure that the company you host with understands the importance of the RSS feed. We see it becoming more and more important. 80-something% of your downloads come from that. Now, one of the kicks that we have gotten over the years has been how the websites that you get with us, and we just rolled out new websites so you can see the new podcast page with Libsyn, and that's a much nicer design. It's truly mobile, completely mobile friendly with widgets on the side and all the different things you would want in a basic web page. So you do get that with Libsyn. I eat my own dog food. I have my sites up on Libsyn for all my shows. That's all I use. I don't use WordPress. I used WordPress a long time ago. My WordPress site got hacked. I hate WordPress. I just tell you right, point blank. I hate WordPress because it's just a nightmare to manage. That said, we also do support publishing into WordPress because we know a lot of people do use WordPress. So we're not going to stop you from using WordPress, but if you're not currently using WordPress, you don't need to podcast. You don't need to do anything else. You can just sign up with Libsyn if you've never even had a website, and it could be your complete one-stop shop. And that's what our whole philosophy is about, making it possible for anybody to podcast and be on a completely level playing field with Mark Maron and Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss. If you host with Libsyn, whatever size your show is, you are on the same playing field as those guys.
Thank you, Rob. Rob, Podcast 411, Today in iOS. Any other shows? The Feed.
The Feed. That's the one about podcasting that I update on a regular basis. 411 is on again and off again. And then Today in iOS is my most regular show. That's it's supposed to be every week. I'd say it's every 5 to 10 days on average.
We'll get links to that in the show notes. I don't have in front of me what episode number this is, so once I let Rob go, I will come back and tell you what episode number this is. But we'll get links to all of Rob and what Rob's doing. Dan offered a coupon code. I happen to have a coupon code at Libsyn, so if you use the coupon code Paul, that gets you your first month entirely for free. And it's really hard to remember Paul. So
And part of it gets you the rest of the current month free and all of next month free. So whatever the current month is, so you get the rest of the current month free and all of the following month free.
So are you saying that if somebody signs up on, say, March 3rd, they would get all of March and all of April for free?
Yep.
There we go. You heard it from Rob. I have not been, I've told many of you that, but I haven't necessarily marketed it. But now that it came from Libsyn, I will certainly let them say that. Rob, I'm going to give you the last word before we close out here, buddy. What should those looking to do real business with their podcast know and think and do?
Start their podcast. I think that's the biggest thing. Don't be saying, "Oh, I'm going to get it started once I get 10 episodes done." Get your first episode, get it out. Don't be one of those, "Oh, I got to wait till I have 10 to launch or 3 to launch." Get one and go. And I think you, Paul, you've proven that with shows more than anybody else out there. It just takes one to move up the charts.
Amazing, huh? Isn't it great to hear forward-thinking thought? And isn't it great to see leadership in terms of where podcasting is going and what the market is bringing and what to do about what we have in front of us right now? This idea of forcing your way, your view, your opinion into someone else's podcasting strategy doesn't let you do, quote unquote, my favorite phrase, real business with your podcast. But what Libsyn has done is definitely fascinating and interesting. Are they perfect? No. Do they have faults? Yes. But they have thought through some things that the others haven't. They have put into place some things that the others haven't. And I don't care where you host, but I want you to have an answer for what happens when Google wants something different. What do you do if you've got a Spotify plan that requires a different publishing schedule? What are you going to think about? Where are you going to go if you look at ad insertion? These elements are not necessarily every step of every podcast in the future, but you want to think about them. You want to consider them. You want to know they're there. And that's why I have this interview with Rob. So thanks again. If you haven't subscribed to the show, please do. Got another great episode for you next week. We will chat soon. Thank you, Rob, for coming on the interview. Bye.